Thank you for downloading Season 6, Episode 9 of Baseball Pitching the FIX, featuring baseball pitching motion expert Angel Borrelli. I am your host, Joe Janish. We are recording this in the beginning of August in 2019. On tap today, what we have first off in our MLB news, we're going to talk about Josh Hader and his mysterious fastball. And in the teaching moment, we will be talking about how to initiate the stride. And in the pearls section, we're going to be talking about throwing programs for pitchers returning after an injury, because after all, Angel is also a re-entry specialist. So without further ado, let's welcome Angel onto the show. Angel, how's it going over there on the left coast?
It's going great. How about you?
All is good here on the right coast. It's been sweltering hot and humid, but hey, that's baseball season for us here, so it's all good. So Angel, today, one of the things that struck me, and I talked to you about it, was I saw an article about Josh Hader, who's a relief pitcher for the Milwaukee Brewers. And there's this intense fascination with him because he's striking out something like 50% of batters that he faces, which is unbelievable. The only other two pitchers that have had such a rate of success of striking out half of everybody they face has been Aroldis Chapman in 2014 and Craig Kimbrell during one of his fantastic years. And the really fascinating thing about him is that, well, he is throwing 95 miles an hour, but 95 miles an hour isn't especially unique these days. So it's not like he's overpowering people. Like, it's not like he has the triple digits, the 100-mile-an-hour fastball. But even more to the point, all he is throwing is fastballs. I mean, he more or less is throwing a very simple four-seam fastball. And generally, the four-seam fastball is the one that is, I don't want to say it's most easily hit, but is the pitch that generally is not the one that pitchers swing and miss. Yet Josh Hader's four-seam fastball is being swung at and missed at an absurd rate. It's just unbelievable how batters are just swinging and missing his four-seam fastball, which is really the most simple, common pitch. Generally doesn't have as much movement, so it should be a little bit easier to make contact with it. Yet 44% of the time, batters are missing his four-seam fastball. And there was this really intense analysis done by some stat heads who they need to explain everything. The whole way baseball has gone with these numbers is a little overboard in my opinion. But in any case, they're trying to create a reason for his effectiveness through numbers. And they're going into like the spin rate. They're going into the spin axis rate. They're going into the different arm angles. They're talking about how the spin rate isn't even measured correctly because there's two different spin angles. There's like the gyroscopic angle, and they're talking about the Magnus effect, and it's getting so geeked out. And I just looked at it and I'm like, oh my goodness, like transverse spin and this spin and that spin. And then all the way at the end of the article, they mention his mechanics. And first they said maybe it's his deception. Maybe it's his herky-jerky motion that's just throwing everybody off. And I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there is something to deception and herky-jerky motions that can throw a batter off, but I find it hard to believe that it could cause that much success. I mean, there's something more to it. But they did say all the way at the end of the article that when Josh Hader is with the Orioles and then later the Brewers, both teams had him undergo biomechanical evaluations, which found that those unusual mechanics had below average stress on his elbow and shoulder. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, I wonder if there's something to his mechanics that is causing him to be so successful. Maybe it doesn't have so much to do with the Magnus effect or the spin rate or the this or the that, things that can be explained on paper. So I brought the argument to you. So tell me, Angel, is there any mechanical reason that Josh Hader is so effective and why his fastball is so unhittable, this mysterious ghost phantom pitch that no one can hit? Is there something to it?
I love this story so much, and I'm giving you like props and 5 stars on this idea to discuss, because when you sent this to me and I read the article, I thought it was so interesting because, well, just like you said, and it was a cute way you said it, these guys were getting so geeked out. They were doing all their stats and everything. So if you talk to somebody who looks at spin rate, they're going to look at the issue from spin rate. If you talk to somebody who does biomechanics and they're looking at specific numbers of angles and put that up against what norms are and numbers that are correlated to injury, they're going to look at it that way. And of course, because I look at things in a muscular way and I look at things in a qualitative way, meaning how the motion's created. I look at the way the muscles are used, the way the fingers are against the ball, definitely staying in my lane on this. I thought it was really funny that nobody could figure out why his pitch was working so well. And I saw, the two videos that were in the article, and the ball does move, to his glove side. So it moves into a righty. He's a lefty. And it did that pretty clearly each time. And there was two different games, and his mechanics looked exactly the same. And I thought it was interesting that nobody can figure out, one, why he's so deceptive, and two, why the ball is moving like that when it's supposed to be a four seam. And Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, even though they're saying it's a four seam fastball, am I correct that it doesn't have a normal spin as a four seam?
Yeah, I would agree with that because he has he doesn't throw traditional overhand. He's more of like a submariner or sidearmer.
Yeah, so it can't be a traditional fastball. It's spinning differently, so I don't know why they're calling it that, but I guess it's because in his arsenal, that's how he thinks of it. But the deal is let's pretend we don't have names for pitches, and let's pretend we're just coming into this neutral, which, by the way, is the way I look at everything. It's a gift not to have a deep, like, I know enough about spin rate and biomechanics. Of course, I had to study all of this stuff, but because I don't dwell there and I don't let it in my brain, it always keeps my eye fresh for the kind of work that I do. So what I think is interesting first about this story that I want everyone to hear is that they're astonished that even though his spin rate is below average, he's doing so well. So the take-home message from this is that spin rate doesn't really tell you anything other than spin rate. Okay, you can't always draw from it. Well, his spin rate is this, therefore. So I think that that's a very interesting take-home message. Secondly, you have to look at the way the body is producing the motion. So first of all, this is a pitcher, a left-handed pitcher, who, when he strides out way, and the way baseball guys say it, is way across his body. Okay, so that's the first thing. So as his right leg leads out, instead of landing in a place where he's able to turn and square up to the hitter so he's facing his target, his right leg is so far over to his left that he cannot get his hips through. And if anybody goes and looks at the videos, the two videos that were included with this article, they will see that his arm, as his arm approaches being squared, his left hip is nowhere near having fully rotated. So somewhere in the middle of the motion, his lower body stopped and his upper body kept going. And when it stopped, and when I mean stop, I mean it stops being a part of the motion in the sense that it's not assisting the motion in terms of squaring the pitcher up. I mean, obviously, we want to be facing the hitter when you're throwing the ball. He does not do that. There are many pitchers that don't. In the baseball world, you call it throwing across your body, and you're really stepping across your body, and your hip can't get around. And when the arm has to get in front of the hip because the hip is stuck and it can't fully rotate, it comes through at an odd angle. So the hitters that they interviewed that said, well, he really deceives, he's really deceptive, I don't know if it's so much that he's hiding the ball or that the ball, it's coming at them from a weird angle, and it's also coming at them before the body actually looks like it's ready to throw. The arm is ready to throw before the body is ready. So therefore, he's not really using his lower body. And that's why they have all this conversation about he looks kind of crazy. But what's happening is he releases the ball with no internal rotation and mostly elbow extension. So what does this mean? When a regular pitcher is squared up to the plate, he's turned his body, he's in max external rotation. The way the ball goes forward is through the shoulder turning, rolling in the direction like a tire does. We've talked about this before. The shoulder goes we think first, but almost simultaneous to the elbow, lengthening the arm. So you get a ball that's going forward and also out to the side at the same time. What a sidearm pitcher does, and let's talk about a true sidearm, where that's what he's actually doing, and he's leaning into the pitch. He brings the arm into that max external rotation position and then just extends the elbow, meaning the hand goes out, but the shoulder doesn't turn over. So he's releasing the ball to the side of his body. What Josh does is he has delayed internal rotation. He sends the hand out, but he doesn't lean into it. So he's not truly throwing in what we call scientifically sidearm. Sidearm scientifically has a lean into the pitch. So he is taking his arm and he's letting go of the elbow very quickly in his rotation. So his arm doesn't stay compacted. The hand just pops out to the side, and then he delivers the ball. So that's what happens with the arm. So he's got almost a sidearm delivery in terms of the way the shoulder and elbow work, not in what science calls overarm. And again, I always remind everyone, I don't mean over the top. I mean overarm, meaning that the shoulder internally rotates to bring the ball forward. His does not. Okay, it has another action that it does. So if I were talking to a scientist, I would be saying he's not internally rotating, he's horizontally adducting, and they would go, oh, okay. So it would be a way, the words are different. That's all you need to know. So and that's why he has a different spin on the ball, and it totally matches the plane that his body is delivering in, the spin that they're saying he has, same words. Now, let's talk about the ball and the movement. I don't care what anybody does or how you try to throw a pitch. In the end, I don't care what your motion looks like or anything. In the end, the hand and the wrist, and the hand meaning the fingers and the wrist, are going to create the best spin for you. If you're trying to throw a four seam, they're going to create the movement for you. It's the way you use your fingers. And the way you use your fingers is going to be controlled by, one, the way you're gripping the ball, or two, the way the wrist is positioned behind the ball, which then will create the way you're gripping the ball. So it's all about the fingers and the wrist, the way the hand is behind the ball, and the way that when you're delivering, which is going to be controlled by where your shoulder and elbow are at. If you are solidly behind the ball, which it's easy to be if you're kind of a normal pitcher, but a sidearm pitcher, he's reaching way out. So he's reaching way out to his left side. He's not leaning into it. So if you just stick your left arm way out, like you're a left-handed tennis player doing a forearm stroke, you reach it way out and you're trying to be behind the ball. You are not going to be behind the ball with the index finger and the middle finger in the way that you would be if you brought that ball in and delivered it more towards you. So what happens is you've got the two fingers that are creating spin and movement, and you've got them coming off the ball in an unusual way. So I didn't have to even analyze this. When I just saw his arm reach out and how quickly he let go of his elbow, as he's coming around, his arm is delivering very quickly, and then it lands into the release point. I said, of course, his ball is going to move to his glove side because of the way his index finger on his left hand is on the ball. I mean, that is what's going to create movement to the left, the finger that's on the ball. And remember, the middle finger comes off the ball first, just prior, few frames prior. And of course, this is all from scientific research where they looked at this. It comes off just prior to the index finger. Well, the middle finger is going to create the spin because he's not behind the ball in a certain way. That finger isn't creating the spin that they're expecting to see because he can't, because he's reached so far out to the side. So his wrist is just controlling it. So that middle finger isn't doing and isn't pulling against the ball the way that another pitcher is who's got the ball in where he can manage it a little better. But he's got this awesome thing that's happening with his index finger, and he has to, otherwise he'd be dropping the ball. This is why the ball moves across his body. This is why the spin is a little bit lower. I mean, and this is just explained if you watch him come into his delivery, whereas another pitcher shows up to square up to the plate and he's tight, his shoulder blades are retracted, his arms in max external rotation, and then he goes forward. This guy's opening up his arm pretty much as he's coming in, and it's real simple to do because his rotation and his lower body stopped, so his upper body took off, and yet his arm then is delivered way out to the side. So how you are behind the ball is going to indicate how you're pulling with the fingers. The way you use the fingers creates the spin and the movement. And it just so happens that the way he's doing this is causing his ball to move this way. And here's what I think, Joe. I think given that, unless he changed his mechanics on each pitch, he could not deliver a ball that did anything other than what he's doing, because I think he's fully out there with the ball coming out of his hand the way it has to because of the position of his body, the way he lets go of his delivery arm, and the way he lets the elbow take over to put the hand out before he internally rotates. He internally rotates after he delivers the ball. It's actually looks simultaneous to ball release, and then he's finally squared up as well. So the sum total of this explanation is the ball goes where the fingers tell it to go. It spins the way the middle finger is used. You can't do any of that unless the wrist is behind the ball in a specific way, and the fingers will be used depending on where the wrist is, and the wrist is where the elbow and shoulder put it. And that's as simple as it can get. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think this is an example of what happens when people who look at baseball watching the actual game, when you're just sitting there looking at data and trying to analyze on a piece of paper as opposed to understanding, and you just can't understand because what you're seeing, you just see four-seam fastball. But to your point, it sounds like he's not really throwing a traditional four-seam fastball. It's not the same spin as a traditional overhand four-seam spin. So really, it's probably closer to a sinker or a slider when it's coming out of his hand, I would think.
Yes, because of the kind of spin. And also, too, the reason why they said the forces, and of course, they're looking at this like, wow, this guy's going to be really safe because he doesn't have the same forces around his shoulder and elbow. It's because the forces aren't the same. He's not, first of all, the shoulder is not being used at delivery the same way. He's not internally rotating. That's why the forces were low. But guess what? Somebody who delivers normally, like Chapman, or somebody who's got a normal arm action, they want the fast shoulder rotation. Remember, it rotates way faster than anything else. So that's part of normal throwing, and that's when you get the forces. So his shoulder isn't being used the way a normal pitcher uses it. So, of course, the forces won't be there. And the elbow, the position the elbow is in when it's taking the most amount of forces, he also is releasing that position pretty quickly because his intent as he's turning around is to throw his hand out, just the way a sidearm might do. He's got an interesting set of mechanics, but I want to warn everybody, this is something you don't teach someone. You don't go out and say, let's be a sidearm pitcher and let your arm flail. If you look at research on sidearm pitchers, they have injuries too. They're in different places. We don't see a lot of it because nobody has a sidearm that's in a full rotation, I don't think, because they are like this guy. They only throw, they don't usually have a whole arsenal of pitches because their body is forcing a certain type of release. So the body's controlling the release, therefore controlling the strategy around the plate. A pitcher who throws overarm is controlling the pitches, controlling his strategy, painting the plate way he wants to. That's a whole different thing. This guy he got into doing this for whatever reason. Maybe his body mechanics created the arm angle. I don't know. But you don't want to try to get someone and say, hey, let's pitch like him, because it would be injurious to somebody to just try to pitch like that. So this guy has learned how to do it, and, more power to him. But this explains, it's not confusing to me, but it could be if you're trying to measure him up against, not realizing he is doing things completely differently. And that's why he's getting a different result. But in the end, that's what the coaches want, right? They want this kind of thing going around the plate. So awesome.
They just want to see swings and misses.
Exactly.
So it sounds like, from what you're telling me about the way he's throwing across his body and not really using his lower half so much, could this eventually lead to arm issues? Because even though the biomechanical results say that it's not as much of a stress on the elbow or the shoulder?
Well, they said the forces weren't there. And so there you can correlate that to, there isn't as much stress. There's a different type of stress, but you have to remember, I don't know, do they use him as a starter?
No, he's a reliever. He's only throwing 20 pitches at a time.
So here's how it all equals out. Crazy mechanics, awesome thing happening around the plate. The only thing that can happen around the plate, use him in a special role. He's a lefty specialist doing something awesome that he can't do for the full game because eventually something they would catch on or whatever. It's not creative enough. Who knows? Whatever the baseball reasons are. So therefore, he's not used a lot. So therefore, he's going to probably be safe. Do you see what I'm saying? It all equals out. It's so rare and so strange, but it has great results, but has some things that don't quite fit into a normal use of a pitcher, but he's great as a specialist. So he doesn't go in often, so therefore he preserves himself. That is the beauty of chaos. It has an organization about it. And so we've got this chaotic sort of thing, but it works perfectly for what he does. But if he ever had pain, it would be easy to explain and for him to learn and have to make some changes. And the changes would be specific. In fact, when you take a picture like that and you change just one part of it, meaning the way he rotates the lower body, he ends up bringing the arm through better. And then you just teach him a little bit about internal rotation. He's doing everything he needs to do. He's just doing parts of it incompletely, other parts too soon, and other parts too late. And so he has all the pieces. They're just not in the same order. And so taking someone like that and fixing him, if he should get into pain and say, hey, I want to change this, which is what it would have to take, because why would he change on his own when it's not hurting and it's working?
Right. Yeah, his pitching motion and the way he throws the ball reminds me a lot of both Chris Sale and Randy Johnson.
Right.
But both of them also have other pitches. Those guys, had sliders and changeups and all kinds of other nasty stuff to throw. They didn't just rely mostly on the fastball. So I guess that's why they were able to start, and he's in a relief role.
Yeah.
From my perspective, again, like with Chris Sale and Randy Johnson, well, Randy Johnson was also 6'10" and a little intimidating in that way. But from the perspective of someone who's a hitter, I think that the arm angle, the arm slot that he throws from is just not common. I mean, usually you see more of that traditional over the head. You're looking for the ball more over the shoulder or close to the shoulder at that height, as opposed to kind of a little lower. And I think that might be part of his effectiveness too. But it's all of those things, right? It's the movement, it's the deception, it's the arm angle, and add it all together with a 96-mile-an-hour fastball, and you get a lot of swings and misses, I guess.
Exactly. It's working. So,
all right. Well, thank you for walking us through that. So let's move into the teaching moment, where you are going to talk about the stride and specifically how it should be initiated.
Yes, and this is kind of a continuation. So the last podcast, thank you everybody for listening and viewing it. I loved it myself. And the last teaching moment was on stability of the front leg. And I had great feedback from it, particularly from coaches who are always looking for ideas of how to teach the skills that happen within the pitching motion. And the pitching motion is a series of individual skills. It's why myself as a kinesiologist, I can break down each one of those skills. I can turn it into an exercise, a drill, and I teach the motion skill by skill. So we had this great episode where we talked about the front leg stability. Well, one of our listeners, hi, Jesse, he wrote in and he asked a very interesting question. And then lo and behold, a few other coaches got in touch with me and their questions kind of were similar. So while creating a stride and getting the motion to be correct during the lower body is complicated, it all needs to start correctly. And I thought today I would talk about the initiation of the stride, because last time we talked about, and if you haven't looked at the drills and heard that teaching moment, I suggest that you do that before you even listen to this. But we talked about the importance of the front leg being stable, because once the front foot lands and the front leg is positioned, the body has to rotate completely around it. And this is sort of what we were talking about with Josh. His front leg doesn't land in the correct place. To what's the correct place? A place that allows the hips to come through. And his hips can't come through. And that's because his foot isn't placed in the correct left to right position. However, you also have to be able to get to that front leg in order to have it be stable. So you've got to place the foot in the right place. Then you've got to get your body weight there. And so many of the questions were, these are great for keeping the front leg stable, but what if a guy can't keep it stable, usually because his body weight isn't there? And how do you get him to get into that front leg? So just to get everybody oriented here, picture the pitcher standing sideways, and he is, let's say he's coming from the stretch. He's going to go down the hill, and his body should be in a sideways position all the way down the hill until the front foot lands. Okay, so picture him at a knee lift. So he's on one leg, his rear leg. The rear leg is the only leg on the ground. So when he starts his motion forward to land, to create the stability in the front leg, he has to move off of the back leg. And the $1 million mystery question to everybody is, how does he actually do that? Well, when I got a lot of questions from coaches, they were like, what if his leg is still moving or he's not really in the front leg? That's because the issue is that he did not shift his weight either fully or correctly. And of course, if it's incorrect, it won't be fully shifted. He did not weight shift correctly. So the movement from the back leg on the ground towards the front leg once it lands is a weight shift movement. And in the body, there is a muscle at the side of the hip, and you can look it up. It's called the gluteus medius, medius, and it is what we call in science a hip abductor. You do not have to remember that. It is designed to move the center of mass sideways. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you an idea of something that's really beautiful about when you use the correct muscle to make the movement happen. And there's a million ways pitchers try to get down the hill. They push hard, they turn their knee in, they do all these crazy things. They jump, they look like they're running. I mean, there's a million ways a pitcher on his own will think that he has to move to get to his front leg. But the truth is, using the correct muscle creates a lot of really great things for the pitching motion. So the photo that we're going to be looking at that is going to be up on my YouTube page, Angel Borrelli Pitching. And also, Joe, the photos are in the notes for the download, the app?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
They'll be in that.
Okay. So we've got two pictures here, and this is Ian from Utah. So in the photo on the left, you'll see him. He's just standing there. We were doing something else, but what this shows is what does he look like when he's just standing up? So what you're going to see here, he happens to have his arm in the perfect stride foot contact arm angle position. But we were doing this for another reason, but I needed to show you. So this is what somebody looks like when their weight is just being passed through both their legs. Look at his right leg. His right hip is right over the right leg. His left hip is over his left leg, and he's just standing there. This is the way normal hips look when you're just standing, loading both legs. Now, if you look at the photo on the right, I asked him to demonstrate what I just talked about, which is hip abduction. And really it is the muscle on the side of the hip moving the pelvis sideways. In other words, he's weight shifting. And for all you guys that golf, this is the position your hips are in at just prior or right at the time of making contact with the ball. This is a weight shift movement that is used in any movement in life where you have to move sideways, including dancing, by the way. So, of course, this poor guy, he's laughing. He thinks this is so funny, but this is the movement. Now, what I want you to notice is first, look at the picture on the left. His hip is in normal resting length. On the picture on the right, he has taken the muscle that is right up. We're just going to say it's up. You know, if you put your hand on your way up high by your belt and then you let your fingers go down sideways alongside your body, we'll just say that's where the muscle's at. It's got kind of a little different configuration, but for purposes of learning. And I asked him to just shift his weight into his left leg by using that muscle. And I had previously shown him where it was. And of course, he knows this because I work with his stride all the time. And that is what it looks like when you use that muscle to shift sideways. And guess what? If you look at a really good biomechanics book or books that really talk about structural biomechanics, et cetera, you'll see that one of the functions of that muscle is to move the center of mass sideways. Now, here's the thing I want everyone to notice. So he has shifted into his left leg. So he's shifting his weight sideways. And you can see that by seeing a clear angle to the leg. And you're following that, right, Joe?
Yep.
Okay, I want you to notice that his body on his upper body shifted over to his right, meaning it is leaning backward in a sense, not really leaning, but it shifted backwards as his hip shifted forwards. Do you see that, Joe?
I do.
Okay, now he didn't do that. And I want all of you coaches do this, stand up in front of the mirror and do exactly what you see him going from standing to this position. And the head and the upper body shift backwards. And Joe, when you were 3 years old, just a little pup, being taught how to throw or how to pitch or do whatever, didn't you hear, stay back with your head, stay back with your upper body?
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course.
Yes, it's an important thing. But when you're told to do it, and it's not happening as a product of another movement that's being done correctly, you get weird things happening with the motion. So that is a non-issue if you teach the correct way to create the stride. Now what happens is the pitcher is coming down off his knee lift. He's moving sideways with his right hip. Just see how his pelvis is. His arm, his upper body then is staying back. So when he lands with his front leg, he hasn't overrun his front leg. He'll have good, stable position. And as he turns, he'll end up right over his left hip joint. So the beauty of moving from this muscle is, one, you don't trash the knee because everyone thinks you turn the knee to get to the front leg. And trust me, the knee doesn't do that. Secondly, you get an efficient weight shift, which keeps your timing together. Third, you get the upper body staying back on its own so that you can create a good motion and have the correct timing again to get the arms where they need to get so that when you land, your arm is in the position Ian's is in the picture on the left. Your legs are in a perfect stride, and then you're in a perfect position to rotate. So the beauty of using the right hip muscle is, one, efficiency. Two, it feeds all the other pieces that we need to have a good motion, which are timing and efficiency. So isn't that interesting?
It is. You know, when I'm looking at these pictures at first, you mentioned dancing, and that's what went through my head. I'm thinking, is this guy doing the Macarena or what's going on here?
Well, trust me, they had their fun. All the guys were out there when we were doing this. And finally, Ian volunteered to, of course, be my guinea pig once again. And it was funny, the jokes that were being made. But yes, the back and forth movement. But anyway, so, and it's counterintuitive. And if you ask pitchers, and I dare all the coaches to do this, go out and ask your pitchers, hey, how do you get from the back leg to the front leg? You will hear the most interesting things, including that the front leg pulls you down the hill, which it can't because it's not on the ground, including that the knee does it. It can't because there's no muscle on the knee that does this sideways movement. And the foot can't do it because if you don't move anything else, your foot won't go anywhere. Your body won't go anywhere. So this is how you do weight shift. And if you're a golfer, coaches, this is a movement you need to know how to do and you need to know how to feel. So this is the answer and the little piece that a lot of coaches asked me about when they said, well, how do we get him to his front leg so that then we can work on it being stable? And this is the first piece to it. They have to move into their stride from this position. So practice, get them in the position that Ian's in on the left, have them slide step into a landing just when they're playing catch, have them do it flat and downhill, but have them intentionally use this muscle and have them swish their hips back and forth, even using the left hip for the righties. Have them go back and forth so they can kind of feel how they can feel where the muscle's at. Once they locate it, they will love it. And it's an extremely powerful muscle in the sense that it can give you that drive that you're looking for downhill, but not so fast that you're going to lose control. So there's the teaching moment for today.
Right. And if it helps, bring a boombox and play, Hey, Macarena. So they can swish their hips, as you
exactly.
say. Swish their hips. Yeah, I don't know if the coaches are going to use that.
I don't
They may
think
come up
they'll
with a different.
Did I say that?
You said swish their hips.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. You know what? You can't take the girl out of the coach. Sorry.
Guys, you'll come up with something better than swish the hips.
Exactly. Shift the hips.
In all seriousness, this is like a great piece of advice and help here for Technique Angel, because if you don't get this right, then everything else is going to be broken. So
exactly.
And it is interesting how you connected this to the golf swing, because it's amazing how all sports require very similar athletic movements. And it kind of, makes you understand why some people are just really good athletes and some not great athletes. I mean, because the movements, they're just fundamental movements that go across all different sports. So with that understood, we should move on to the pearls. And I'm opening up the box of pearls, and it smells like a brand new car. Or no, even better, it smells like a brand new box of balls. And Angel, being a reentry specialist, she's going to talk about some of the throwing programs that help a pitcher who's returning to pitching after an injury.
Yes, actually, a way to say this is I'm going to mention some of the awful throwing programs I've seen recently and some of the pieces that I want every coach out there to be sure is included when you have a pitcher returning and he shows up and says, I have a throwing program. I would like to educate you coaches. So you take that throwing program out of his hand, you take a look at it, and you make sure that it's not insane. And if you have any questions, you can call me, because in the last few weeks, I never thought I was going to see this or say this. I have seen throwing programs that were so not good and so, I'll say, dangerous that you don't want your pitchers doing this kind of program, because the chances of them being able to successfully rehab from their injury would not be good. So let's just start with when a pitcher is re-entering after injury, he has to do a certain amount of flat ground throwing. He has to do this in terms of varying the distances. And we'll talk about, of course, the pitcher that's a 60-foot pitcher. He is going to start at a 45-foot distance. And you go from that to, and this is where your own personal opinion is going to come in, whether you take him only to 60 and then he, is eating up a lot of calendar time with normal distance, or if you're somebody who feels that you want to take him out a long toss distance, which is something that I don't do because of the forces that are increased on the arm and the pitcher doesn't need it. But in either case, the first weeks of the program and the way the program is set up needs to be in adjusted increments from a short distance to a longer distance. And each thing that is assigned has to be done 2 or 3 times before he progresses to the next volume. and then again before he progresses to the next distance, and again when he progresses to the next volume on that distance. If you don't go through the 45-foot and the 60-foot distances correctly with the changes in volume from 50 to 75, with days off in between throwing, if you don't do this, and if it doesn't take at least 4 or 5 weeks to get through those phases, then your pitcher is running the risk of having his pain resurface. So the second thing that has to happen is you have to look at and put the piece in there as to what was he doing wrong that caused the injury to begin with. And when he is in these shorter distance phases, you have to bring in the corrections that he is going to need to use to correct what caused him pain. And every pitcher will return to his throwing program with his former mechanical issues. There's no way around it. Also, he will be introducing new mechanical issues because the body will be trying to protect whatever it is that he injured. So if he's had a shoulder injury, he's not going to want to go into external rotation. If he's had an elbow surgery, he's not going to want to have his arm in the position where the forces are the greatest on the elbow. So the body all by itself finds a new way to pitch. So now you've got the old mechanics that cause problems. You've got the new adjustment that the body has made all by itself to try to avoid pain. And you have somebody starting out in a rehab program and he's not throwing correctly. And the chances of him returning to his former self or to a better version of himself, which is what he should be aiming for, will be slim. So I want all the coaches to start putting their 2 cents into this, because what happens is we've got a lot of people involved in the mix. Very few are pitching specialists, and there's a lot of programs running around out there where they're starting the pitchers at 60 feet, moving them to 70, and this is all happening in a week. Or we've got them throwing 45, but the second time they throw, they're at 60. We don't have enough going on in terms of allowing the pitcher to stay at the same place and using those shorter distances to work on the mechanics. And nowhere in these throwing programs do I see that the adjustment to the mechanics is being made, and that drills and different exercises that can be used to eat up part of the volume that they're doing can be used to make sure the corrections are there. So by the time he gets to 60 feet or 70, if you're going to take him longer, that he is actually throwing correctly. So I want coaches to start asking their pitchers, what are you doing? Let me see it. And if you don't see something that looks extremely conservative, at least in the first 4 weeks, I want you to have your little antenna up and have a discussion with the pitcher or the person who gave them that throwing program and see if you can come up with something that's a little bit better. But I think the reason why pitchers are getting re-injured and they're also sometimes returning to play and they don't feel great has nothing to do with the surgery itself. It also doesn't have to do with the injury itself. It has to do with the way the pitcher was rehabbed and also the way that you viewed the injury itself. You have to view it from the perspective that the pitcher was doing something so wrong that the body couldn't take it anymore, and that there's no way that pitcher is going to do it correctly unless he now starts to recognize that he needs to change and then makes the adjustments. If he doesn't, he will end up having a very frustrating false start to his throwing. And nothing's more debilitating to a pitcher than to pick up a ball and throw it after surgery when he's been released to throw and he hurts the way he did or worse than he did the day before or the time before he had the surgery. That is the worst thing to hear out of a pitcher's mouth. And I get the calls after they've already tried something. They don't know me. They heard about me. And the stories that I hear are heartbreaking. The other thing that also I want everyone to consider is when you have pitchers that are re-entering, especially your valuable guys who you're like praying that they get better for the start of the season, make sure that before they throw a ball, and even sometimes, the doctor might say you're ready to throw, you ask him if he's been in the gym training for at least 2 to 3 weeks on that specific area with weights to eliminate at least the initial possibility that he's not healed. If he can't do straight on strength training of a body part that's been operated, then he's not ready to throw a ball. And so what I do when someone says, the doctor says I can throw, I say, let me see if you can throw. And I bring them in the gym. We explore exercises. They do them. They not only get stronger, but you're eliminating the chances of him having a false start. The other thing is you're giving him 3 weeks to start to experience that joint as being healthy. So I want this to start being an alert, and I want to address throwing programs more in the future. But for right now, I want everyone to just start thinking about this, particularly if you have pitchers that are going to be trying to return to play. There's a way to do it where you never have a false start. And it's one of the things that I love doing from the beginning of my career. And now I consider myself a specialist at it because it takes a lot of input and a lot of information, but to come up with the right program for each pitcher. And if you see a guy who's been handed a piece of paper that's Xeroxed, it's like, go do this, and there's nothing personal about it, the chances of it being good for that pitcher are slim. So I want everyone on high alert, and let's start to at least recognize that we've got to do something better, and feel free to call me for any help I can be with any pitchers that you have that might need something unique.
Well, it's a nice shiny pearl, Angel. We've talked about it here on the podcast. For those our longtime listeners have heard it many times before. But, I think the biggest thing that when pitchers are re-entering, they don't go back and figure out how they got hurt in the first place. They just go right back to the same exact mechanics and the same exact flaws in their mechanics that caused the injury in the first place. And I think that's like number one thing that just completely gets skipped every time.
Exactly. There's an art to reentry throwing programs, and everybody seems to drop the ball at this point, but it doesn't have to be that way. So that's why I want to bring all you coaches in on it. We need to start getting more involved, and you'll be surprised how much you notice when you look at a program. Don't think you have to be in the medical world to be able to see that a program may not be the best.
Right. If a pitcher gets hurt, there's a reason. It's not necessarily because of too many pitches, or not necessarily because the throwing motion is quote unquote unnatural or anything like that. We've talked about that before. Again, just like figure out how it happened in the first place and start right there. So, Angel, thanks so much. I think we have covered quite a few things today. Some really good stuff that should be of good use to all of our listeners. And if you heard something you liked here, you learned something, or you thought this was something useful, please pass along our show to one of your other coaches or parents or pitchers. We really would appreciate it. Anything else you want to talk about today, Angel?
No, I think that's it. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
All right. We'll be back in about 2 weeks. And until then, we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.